Okay, and as I've said, my presentation, please. As I said, we will take questions, and there will also be the presentation of some wonderful memories of this conference at the end of the entire session. Admiral, thank you very much. Right. As the chair, I also get the double honour of giving a keynote speech as well. But I will keep myself to time, otherwise I will punish myself severely. I'm going to begin with some words from one of our great romantic poets, Lord Byron. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man marks the earth with ruin. You say that again. His control stops with the shore. Upon the watery plain, the wrecks are all thy deed. The wrecks are all thy deed. Nor doth remain a shadow of man's ravage save his own, when for a moment, like a drop of rain, he sinks into thy depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. Now, when Byron wrote those words 200 years ago, stops with the shore, that was absolutely correct. During the 17th century, our international law, which relates in particular to the law of the sea, was being evolved, and an important figure was Hugo Grotius, a Dutchman, who formulated the principle, which the Admiral also referred to, that the sea was international, it was for everybody's use, the global commons. However, it would be an Englishman, wouldn't it? Selden, who opined, on the contrary, that the dominion of the British Sea, or that which encompasses the Isle of Great Britain, is and ever have been a part or a pendant of the empire of that island. So if he lived now, I expect Selden would have voted for Brexit. So Selden was ahead of his time. He tried to argue that the sea was as capable of appropriation as the land, and 350 years later, with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982, technology and law combined to make that happen. For many years, the territorial sea of a country was 3 miles, which coincided with the range of a cannon fired from land. It was never an agreed principle of international law, but most people tended to abide by it from the late 18th century. I just wanted to say, why is this question of the territorialization of the sea relevant to a conference on globalization, entrepreneurship, and emerging economies? It's certainly obviously relevant to maritime crime and security, which is this particular session. Well, first of all, states are increasingly claiming exclusive rights to natural resources on the seabed and in the sea, by which we mainly mean fish. Why is this happening? Ah, there we go. Fish has reached its limit of exploitation. The fish belong to the nation whose EEZ they are in, but of course the fish don't know that, and they have this annoying habit of moving between EEZs. They currently provide 15 to 20% of protein consumed by the human race, and more, 50%, to the populations of some emerging economies and developing states, especially coastal developing states, and SIDS, small island developing states. But those very countries, the most vulnerable, which need maritime resources most are the very ones that are least able to protect those resources to which they are entitled under international law against illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing. We know that 80 to 90% of world trade by volume goes by sea, but this is also increasingly constrained and threatened by states at choke points. So the process of territorializing the ocean can inhibit free trade. Here's the Indian Ocean again, and of the world's 6 leading maritime choke points, 3 are at the edges of the Indian Ocean. The Strait of Hormuz, of course, through which 1/5 of all the world's oil passes and 1/3 of all the world's oil transported by sea. The Bab el-Mandeb, which carries oil, carries ships to and from the Suez Canal, which is another choke point. And of course the Strait of Malacca, 85% of China's oil imports and a similar amount of the exports, all your computers and mobile phones that are made in China, goes out through the Straits of Malacca, where they're vulnerable in particular to piracy, but the littoral states, again, could impose a blockade if they wanted to. Oil isn't the only commodity either. There are also choke points which control or could control food exports or imports. So when did this process of territorialization of the seas begin? Well, it really began with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. UNCLOS laid out the basic rules. From 3 miles, territorial seas were extended to 12 miles. There's also a contiguous zone of another 12 miles, which is quite interesting, where states have certain rights to intercept or interdict traffic that they think may be a threat to them. And then the exclusive economic zone, which goes out to 200 nautical miles. Sorry about that. And then if you have your continental shelf extends beyond the 200 miles, everybody is entitled to 200 miles, even states that don't have a continental shelf. But if it goes beyond that 200 miles, you can make a case to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea to extend it out to 350 miles. The term outer continental shelf originated in the United States, where the individual states of the United States had 3 miles. So I prefer the use of the term extended. The width of the continental shelf varies considerably. It's not uncommon for an area, particularly an island, which is a volcano sticking out from under the sea, to have no continental shelf at all. The biggest continental shelf is the Siberian shelf in the Arctic Ocean, which stretches to 1,500 kilometers, about 900 miles in width. The South China Sea lies over another extensive continental shelf, and the average width is only about 80 kilometers or 50 miles. And continental shelf waters, they tend to be limited to water that's shallower than 100 meters, but not always. well, we've already heard that the seabed provides 32% of the global supply of hydrocarbons, and 3/4 of that is on the continental shelf. So that's where you'll find your oil rigs. In the Arctic, as I said, the Siberian shelf is the biggest continental shelf, and making expert use of the UNCLOS treaty, the Russians have claimed that the Lomonosov Ridge, which is part of their continental shelf, goes all the way to the North Pole, and that's the normal 200-mile limit from Russian territory, like Novaya Zemlya here. So in 2007, the Russians put a titanium flag on the North Pole. However, if we sorry. Oh, there we go. Yeah, 200 miles takes you to there, and if you take the scale, I don't think the North Pole's 350 miles off. I think it's more like 400. So I think President Putin's been telling porkies. Anyway. Now, this idea of the extension of state control over what used to be the free sea reminded me, it's a bit as if the ocean was stripped away. Like that. I got that idea actually from a wonderful set of programs on National Geographic Channel called Drain the Ocean, where using modern expert mapping of the seabed and modern computer technology, they were able to actually strip the ocean and show what was on the bottom. It's of great interest to those of you who follow naval sea battles, but it's also relevant, for example, when looking for lost cities or lost bits of cities. If we take half of the average depth of the ocean away, we get that. Now, this is not the continental shelf. These, for example, are known as mid-ocean ridges. As I said, the continental shelf is adjacent to the continents and tends to comprise relatively shallow water, and those are the continental shelves. And if we impose on that the 200 nautical mile EEZs that everybody's entitled to, you'll see that there's a pretty close correlation. As I said, the Siberian, for example, up here you see the continental shelf sticking out beyond the 200 miles. Case studies very quickly. The first one is the Sea of Azov, and in 2014, as you know, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. So there is Crimea, now annexed from Ukraine, and immediately the Russians, being the Russians, started building a gigantic bridge across the Kerch Strait, utilizing Daffodil Island, and it was opened in 2018. The 4-lane motorway was opened in 2018. The 2-track railway is still being completed, and there's only one way through it for ships. The 50-meter high archway there. And so what this has done is effectively prevent anybody entering the Sea of Azov. There was a spat between the Russians and the Ukrainians very soon afterwards. You can see here that you've got the Russian territorial sea, 12 miles, now de facto extending off Crimea. You've got the Ukrainian territorial sea, and a couple of Ukrainian warships tried to get through the bridge to go to Ukrainian ports here, and was promptly stopped by the Russians and arrested. So what has happened is that that bridge has turned the Sea of Azov into a Russian lake. My second example, Strait of Hormuz, it's very narrow. At its narrowest point, it's only 20 miles wide. So Iranian territorial waters extend to here, Omani territorial waters to here. So the international shipping lanes carrying 1/3 of the oil that travels by sea are on the Omani side. 20 miles wide, so it's split halfway. You can't go there because it's too shallow. This is the area you can see, 12 miles. So you can see that the 200-mile EEZ actually was based on the Continental Shelf, and the 12-mile territorial sea is sort of coincides with how far you can see. And that's Iranian territorial waters. So you can see that the rights of states to a part of the sea are a crucial part of turning the Strait of Hormuz into a choke point. Case study 3, South China Sea. You know about this. Way back in 1947, the then Republic of China claimed the famous 9-dash line. In fact, it was 11 dashes, but they took a couple of dashes out, probably because they were running out of ink. And there you see it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you will see that in asserting that claim, the Spratly Islands are key. Spratly Islands there. We'll just take 3 of our dashes. Just 3 of our dashes, shall we? And there are absolutely fantastic photographs available on the web at this website. Oh, we've got 1 dash there. In fact, I have pictures of 3 of these, but I'm only going to look at Mischief Reef, which is the one furthest east and nearest to Philippines. In fact, it lies inside the Philippine EEZ, and that's what it looked like in 2012. Wait for it. That's what it looks like now. So the Chinese have built a huge installation. They are naval bases. They're defended by anti-aircraft guns, but they're creating Chinese territory out of nothing also helps reinforce their claim using the UNCLOS rules to more of the South China Sea. And you can see that inlet has been widened, suggesting that they are aiming to create a naval base. So China had this rather dodgy claim, which has been rejected by ITLOS, to the 9-dash line, and is reinforcing it by building artificial islands on the Spratlys and elsewhere. So, conclusions. International law is a potential challenge to nation states' national security concerns. The high seas are increasingly being territorialized, and thus the seas are being stripped away, metaphorically. States can increasingly close off the choke points. They have always been critical, but now they are increasingly vulnerable. And some countries are exploiting international law to increase their maritime territory. Russia in the Arctic, China in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, those who are most in need of ocean resources are unable to police their 200-mile EEZs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.